Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last session at CME Palooza Spring 2022. I'm Derek Warnick, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza. This is our Dr. McGowan's Magical Measurement Club. We hope you will enjoy the show session, sponsored by Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning and Catamount Medical Education. I have moderator in there. You're not really, unless you're moderating yourself. Our speaker today is Brian McGowan, co-founder and chief learning officer of Archimedics, and also Outcome Standardization Project steering team member. My question for you, Brian, is: did you know that it was Masters Week when you agreed to present, or did you find that out afterwards?
I knew it, and I was just hoping it was rainy.
Well, your wish came true, I guess. Okay, our sponsors for CME Palooza, our last reading of sponsors. Big thank you to all of them. Our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, Med Learning Group, and PER. Our silver sponsors, Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Academic CME, Antidote Education Company, Catamount Medical Education, Hippocrates, and Helio CME. Platform Q Health Education, Integrity CE, Prova Education, RedMed Ed, Vindico Medical Education, and our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, Bonum Continuing Education, CMEology, CME Outfitters, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, which reminds me, Infograph Ed, I'm very thirsty. I have this handy little straw. Oh, thanks. Product promotion done. Okay. Integritas Communications and MedIQ. Paradigm Medical Communications, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, PriMed, PVI, RMEI Medical Education, and Right Medicine. 3 ways that you can ask questions. I'll be monitoring all 3. You can either use our Creative Educational Concepts text line, 267-6660-CME. You can tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag, and you can also ask questions in YouTube chat. Just click on the Watch on YouTube link within YouTube and go, and you can enter questions in the chat function. We won't be using Poll Everywhere for this session, but a big thank you to Array for supporting Poll Everywhere that was used the rest of the day. So thanks to them for that. And last, before I turn things over to Brian, any opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or affiliates. So with that, let me bring up your slides. And Brian, you can take it away.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Magical Measurement Club. I will apologize in advance for all the corny Beatles puns and cliches. When we were planning this session, Derek and I had just watched the Beatles documentary, and we thought we were very funny. So we'll see how it all works out.
We were very funny. We didn't think we were very funny.
Thank you. We were very funny. But it also gives us the ability to infringe upon some copyright laws. So every once in a while, all right. So before we begin this presentation, let's keep in mind the first rule of the Magical Measurement Club, and that is for the next 35 minutes, we are going to think like scientists. By this, I mean, let's think critically about outcomes measurement. Let's not make any assumptions without evidence, and let's ensure that we have a clearly and explicitly stated goal. And our goal for the Magical Measurement Club is to accurately understand the impact of our educational interventions. Now, within this goal, there's actually 2 critical parts. The first one is by accurately understand, we mean that we need to fully recognize and embrace the strengths and the limitations of our measurement methods. And the second part, is that we need to understand the impact of our educational interventions. And this means we need to understand how our learners were changed, often in accordance with the objectives, as a result of our interventions. And finally, before digging into the Magical Measurement Club, I want to take a little bit of time for those who haven't formally participated in the Magical Measurement Club, which is getting increasingly difficult to say. Let me share one example of how we think like a scientist and how we accurately understand our impact. Okay. So for about 15 years, our community has embraced Moore's model to guide our traditional means of measuring impact, but very few in our community have embraced a key deconstruction of Moore's model, a deconstruction that will surface later in today's session. So I want to introduce it here to get our juices flowing a little bit. I want you to think about levels 1 through 4 of Moore's as being leading measures. These are things that we can measure at the time of an educational intervention versus levels 5 through 7 as being lagging measures, things that we would measure days, weeks, even months after an educational intervention. Because as we soon learn, this deconstruction of Moore's will actually enable our future advancement of outcomes measurements. But now that we've clarified our goals and we all agree that we're going to think like scientists, let's introduce the 4 critical tenets of the Magical Measurement Club. Number 1, yesterday. Number 2, mastery fields forever. Number 3, with a little help from mindset. And number 4, the leading and lagging road, the missing link to our measurements. I'm going to ask everybody who's participating now, and if you're participating in the enduring recording down the road, do me a favor, write these 4 things down. Write down yesterday, take a little bit of space, write down mastery field forever, take a little space, write down a little help from mindset, take a little space, write down a leading and lagging road. We're going to use these 4 as the outpost for our notes. That's going to make sure that we extract from this learning experience everything we can. And then hopefully you can share those notes with your colleagues who are not participating today. And yes, the slides will be made available immediately following this activity. So let's move on to our first tenet. While I have a drink.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though.
So our first tenet of the Magical Measurement Club is yesterday. What does that mean? It means that if we accept that multiple choice questions serve as our most widely used tool in our outcomes toolbox, which makes sense because they're easy to analyze, they're relatively easy to complete as a learner, and they're seemingly easy to construct. Well, for full context, an analysis of over 1,500 multiple choice questions demonstrates the following: that in medical education, approximately 90% of the assessment questions we ask are single select multiple choice questions, and approximately 11% of the questions that we ask in continuing medical education are multi-select questions. We look a little bit more deeply. Of the multiple choice questions, approximately 64% of all the questions used in medical education use a 4-choice structure. Approximately 14% use a 3-choice structure. 10% of the questions use a 2-choice structure. Think of true-false questions. And approximately 12% of the questions we use in continuing medical education use a 5-choice structure. Now, while evidence is not absolute on what the best structure is for multiple choice questions, there is one critical limitation that must be fully acknowledged, and that's the impact of guessing on outcomes validity. So let's look at how guessing impacts our outcomes validity. We're going to show an example here. This is a set of learners, and we're assuming that the learners, after completing an activity, actually knew 50% of the instructed content. 50% of the content that was taught to them, they knew. If we accept that the content that they don't know, they may take some varying degrees of an educated guess at, then based on the randomness of guessing, we would expect that for activities that have a two-choice assessment, even though they only know 50% of the content, that based on guessing, those learners would get 75% of the questions correct. For an assessment with 3 choices, learners would be expected to get 66% of the questions correct. And for activities with 4-choice assessments, the learners would be expected to get 63%. So what you're seeing in red is the random guessing through the additional questions that they did not know. Let's look at how guessing in a slightly different way might impact our assessment. So here, if we were to set for our assessments a passing threshold at 75%, and we were to utilize a 2-choice assessment, that means learners would only have to know 50% of the stuff to pass the test. If you use the 3-choice assessment, a learner would have to know 62% of the content to pass the test. And if you utilized a 4-choice assessment, a learner would actually have to know 66.6% of the assessment. In other words, best case scenario with multiple choice questions, our outcomes data is overstating correctness by 9 to 25%. But this gets worse. The problem's magnified with crappy distractors. Let's accept that while multiple choice question construction is believed to be easy, it's more than likely that one of the choices that you offer in a question may be leading or may be found by most learners to be irrelevant. That makes a 2-choice assessment principally a 1-choice assessment, a 3-choice assessment, a 2-choice assessment, and a 4-choice assessment, a 3-choice assessment. That means by just having one bad distractor in each question for a learner in a 2-choice assessment to pass the post-test, they actually only need to know 25% of the content. If you were to offer a 3-choice assessment with one bad choice per question, the learners would only need to know 50% of the content to pass the assessment. And if you offered a 4-choice assessment with one bad choice, the learners would only need to know 62.5% of the content to pass your assessment. So you can beat your chest and say that 80% of learners pass the 75% mark. But in reality, just one bad distractor probably makes that number closer to 30 or 40% of the learners had the requisite knowledge to pass the post-test. But wait, good. Derek, what do you got?
Not really a question, more a comment, but maybe one you want to respond to as well. Just that all this doesn't even necessarily take into account that clinicians, by way of life experience, could potentially be even better than just random guessing at multiple choice tests.
Sure. But so we're in each of these cases, we're assuming that their knowledge is X. And now they're guessing through the rest. So you set that foundational assumption. If they only know 50% of the content, then guessing their way through the rest will lead to these various outcomes. Okay. And so we have one final fly in the ointment, and that is how large the magnitude of the problem gets with repeat guessing. So the validity of your multiple choice question measurements approaches zero when you use a second, third, fourth, or fifth attempt. So if you report on final attempts, then any of the questions, because you're eliminating the things you got wrong, so you get to re-guess. In reality, by leveraging a final post-test or a repeat post-test attempt, your validity approaches zero. And I want to draw one key distinction here. If you notice that each of the bars on the 2-choice assessment, 3-choice assessment, or 4-choice assessment are just capping about 2 to 3% higher than the passing threshold, and that's real. So when you use multiple or repeated attempts, and that's the data that you report back on, and this is data from over 100,000 post tests that I've modeled off of, you're going to find that the overall assessment performance averages about 2 to 3% greater than the passing threshold in which you set for the activity. Okay, so guessing is a pretty key problem. So let's move on to the second tenet here. And that gets us to...
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Field.
So while multiple choice questions remain one of the primary tools, we should now acknowledge that we need to overcome the limitations of guessing. So this brings us to our second tenet, that is mastery fields forever. Now, mastery is an outcomes measure that describes a learner's knowledge and or competence and their confidence in that knowledge or competence. Now, time prohibits a deep dive into 2 decades of research on the foundational evidence for what is more broadly known as confidence-based assessment. So I strongly suggest that you investigate this methodology. And if there's anyone who has any questions, you guys know how to find me. So either on LinkedIn or through Twitter, or you can connect with Derek or send me an email or call me. But what we're going to try to focus on today is just enough of a dive into the benefits of mastery. Okay. I want you to accept that there's decades of research. I'm going to try to highlight the benefits that we'll see as a community by embracing mastery or confidence-based assessment. For those that are unaware or unfamiliar with mastery-based assessment, the method that is preferred in the research is this bundled or 2-part question approach, where an initial multiple choice question is asked, and at the same time that the learner answers the question, they're confronted with, or they're introduced to the secondary question, which is now, how confident are you in the answer? The close proximity of answering the question and making a confidence statement is critical for two reasons. Number one is it forces the learner to be more reflective. And number two, it's actually applying the confidence statement directly to the question. It's not a generalized confidence-based evaluation. It is a very tightly coupled confidence-based assessment. Now, in traditional assessment, what we're doing is really reporting on correctness. And as we just saw with guessing, what we're seeing in that data could be, at a minimum, overstating the correctness of a learner by 9 to 25%, and probably likely more than that. What we can see with confidence-based or mastery-based assessment is that we have a more accurate, more granular, more fine-tuned segmentation of the learners. So if we start with the y-axis, we're looking at low confidence statements versus high confidence statements. And if we look at the x-axis, we're looking at incorrect correctness versus correct correctness. So the upper right is someone who's correct and highly confident. We move down to the doubt square, and this is someone who's correct but lacks confidence. Then we get this whole smattering of folks who are simply guessing their way through the assessment. We move to the lower left-hand corner. We have someone who's incorrect but not confident in their answer. to the upper left-hand corner, and that's someone who's misinformed, where they're both highly confident and unfortunately incorrect. So now we're segmenting learners not into did you know it or did you not know it, but how does your knowledge and confidence blend together? This gives us far more detail in the data that we're generating in this leading measure. Now we can look at the change from pre-test to post-test in what percentage of learners were misinformed, what percentage of learners were guessing their way through the assessment, what percentage of learners were found to be in mastery. And that's a critical value, a critical benefit of mastery-based assessment. But I want to leave you with a critical takeaway here, which is the most important thing that mastery or confidence-based assessment does for our community is it more accurately depicts the impact we're having. And I'm going to give you one of thousands of examples of this. In the data I just shared with you, in that question and that traditional assessment data and that confidence-based assessment, that's all real data from real activities. And what that data demonstrated is using correctness, traditional assessment, we found a 14% increase from pre-test to first post-test. And we found a 63% increase from pre-test to final post-test. Why? Because learners guess their way through the content more and more efficiently. But when we look at mastery-based assessment, we find a 47% increase in mastery from pre to first. That increases up to a 164% increase in mastery from pre to final. We also find a 68% reduction in guessing from pre to first, and that ticks up to a 77% increase or decrease in guessing from pre to final. So if we just look at the basic outcomes measurement that we now have at our fingertips, we can say that the educational impact was 14% from pre to post if we use traditional assessment, or we can say it was 47% better from pre to post if we use mastery-based assessment. And you will see this constantly, because not only are your educational interventions increasing the correctness or the knowledge of your learners, but they're also accurately increasing the confidence of your learners. So when you marry these two things together, you get a bigger number, a better looking number, a more accurate number that depicts the impact of your education. That alone should lead this community to use confidence-based assessment increasingly frequently. Our third tenet of the Magical Measurement Club. With this one, we're reaching pretty far outside our profession.
What would you think if I sang attitude? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Let me.
All right. So mindset, again, due to time constraints, we don't have a lot of time to dig into nearly 3 decades of research about mindset as an educational indicator, a key performance indicator, or an outcomes measurement. So I would highly suggest that you read Dweck's book Mindset, in which she summarizes these 30 years of research. What we do have time for today is, again, to present the value, the benefit of bringing mindset modeling, bringing mindset science into continuing medical education. And the basics that we need to know to understand this are, number one, that an individual found to have a growth or open mindset, that's a belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate. You're open to improvement. Folks that are found to have a fixed or closed mindset, this is a belief that your intelligence or your potential are static. Now, here's a key important nugget in mindset research, and that is the fact that mindset is static. I'm sorry, it's not static or unchanging. So while you may, through pop psychology, believe that you have an open mindset or a fixed mindset, In reality, while adults tend to be maybe a little bit more growth mindset or a little bit more fixed mindset, mindset itself is situational. It's content or domain specific. There are certainly days where your resource levels are low and you're less open to an open mindset. And there may be some topics that are so interesting to you that you're always open and always have a growth mindset. But keep in mind, it's domain specific. So a clinician focusing on some new drug regimen may have an open mindset. That same clinician in that same clinical area, when dealing with some new diagnostic, may have a much more closed mindset. And why this is important, or the benefit to us, is that what the research shows, study after study after study, is that learners with a growth mindset persist longer when engaging in challenging problem sets or content. Learners with a growth mindset learn more and learn more efficiently. And learners with a growth mindset demonstrate higher job performance. They change their behaviors and they improve far more rapidly and far more effectively than learners with a closed mindset. Take a sec to digest that. What we as a community need to understand is that mindset is an intrinsic attribute of a learner, and mindset is a modeled measure of a learner's curiosity, their resilience or their grit, their autonomy as self-directed learners, and their intention to change. Take it in for a second. Because hopefully by now you can begin to see how our first three tenets of the Magical Measurement Club, we're building a better model. We're building a better model to accurately understand the impact of our educational interventions. And this leads us to our fourth tenet of the Magical Measurement Club. DJ, play that funky music.
The long and winding road that leads to your love.
And leads to better measurement, leads to better outcomes, leads to better success. We began by reframing Moore's model as a set of leading and lagging measures. And the implications of this deconstruction are real, right? Leading measures are believed to be easier to measure in theory. They cost a lot less to measure them, but in reality, they're often much lower value and much less relevant to healthcare quality. While lagging measures, they're harder to implement, they're generally believed to be far more costly, and they're far more meaningful. So we have this push and pull. We have these easier things to measure that provide us less value, and these costlier things to measure that provide us greater value. That's what Moore's model teaches us. That deconstruction of Moore's model has been lost on our community for well more than a decade. The reality of Moore's model is that there's a missing link. The benefits and the limitations of the leading measures differ from the benefits and the limitations of the lagging measures. However, in our community, 90+% of what we measure are in that leading measurement category. So now, as a card-carrying member of the Dr. McGowan's Magical Measurement Club, hopefully you can begin to understand the value of this missing link. How can we bridge the benefits and the limitations of leading levels of and measures with the benefits and the limitations of lagging levels and measures? This missing link will be more timely. We'll measure it more quickly. We'll generate data more quickly. It'll be less expensive. It'll be easier to measure, but it'll be more meaningful. In other words, the missing link in Moore's model is measures that are predictive. All the benefits of the leading measures with all the value of the lagging measures. The fourth tenet of the Magical Measurement Club is that by more strategically, more intelligently, and more accurately leveraging leading measures, we can predict changes in performance, we can predict changes in patient health, and we can predict changes in community health. To boil this down to its simplest parts, by blending the traditional assessment of knowledge and competence with the added accuracy of confidence-based assessment or mastery-based assessment, with the predictive accuracy of mindset, we can model a learner's readiness to change, their readiness to improve, and their readiness to perform. In other words, readiness, this predictive measure, triangulates the different measurement methods to provide actionable, performance-focused, and accurately predictive insights. That's a club we want to belong to. So let's summarize. Our first tenet is that the impact of guessing significantly undermines the validity of traditional outcomes assessment. That doesn't make them bad. It means we need to embrace and acknowledge that limitation. Our second tenet is that confidence-based methodology mitigates the guessing challenge. In addition, mastery-based assessment uncovers far more meaningful learning change and impact. Our third tenet, mindset equals improved learning and performance. Therefore, mindset provides a critical additional leading influence on impact. And finally, our missing link, readiness. Readiness requires us to transform our traditional but limited leading measures to design a fully modeled, predictive outcome. Welcome to the Magical Measurement Club.
We had a question.
Awesome.
Can we or should we develop activities that focus on changing mindset?
Yes. Would you
so
like me to elaborate?
Yes, that would be.
Okay. So
you have 28 minutes to elaborate on that one.
Before everyone gets to the bar. The vast majority of the mindset literature uses a reframing strategy to derive their outcomes. So their methodology basically says we're going to have 100 learners walk into a room, and for 50% of the learners, we're going to move them into a growth mindset, or we're going to move them into a fixed mindset. How do you do that? For moving them into a growth mindset, you offer them an article. Maybe it's a 2-paragraph article, or maybe it's a 30-second little primer video that says, did you know that some of the most important inventions were invented by people who struggled to make their high school forensics team? Did you know that Michael Jordan famously didn't make his high school basketball team? You lead. It doesn't need to be explicit, but you lead with a few anecdotes that suggest to the individual learners that they can improve, that there is a dramatic upside to their potential. And for the fixed mindset, you go just the other way, that things are closed off, that failure is a reality, that some people have greater talents and skills. That's what the vast majority of growth mindset literature demonstrates. And now when you put those people into a learning environment, the people with growth mindset do infinitely better, and the people with fixed mindset do infinitely worse. When I say infinitely, I'm talking a 1, 2, sometimes even a 3-fold difference in learning. So as educators in continuing medical education, how do we take that experimental setting, that laboratory experiment, and apply it to what we do? Well, there's a few different limitations in that original research. And one of those is that it was artificial. And so what we want to try to do is not just provide a busy clinician with 30 seconds on Michael Jordan's high school academic career. We want to provide them with examples. So when you start to think through the case studies or the simulations that you're providing, just position those. There's a little bit of choice architecture that would go on early in the activity, just offering that person a more reflective, a more open-minded state. With that, you can basically, from the literature, again, there's a slight extrapolation here, but from the literature, just impacting an individual's mindset should have that 20, 40, 50% uptick in learning effectiveness. And we've actually seen that in Archimedics for the better part of 2 or 3 years. We model mindset for every learner that participates in every single activity. And I can tell you the difference between those individuals who model as high mindset or open mindset and those individuals that model as fixed or closed mindset. It is 1 or 2, sometimes even a 3-fold difference in how effective the learning is. Question number 1.
Just talking, going back to what you just said about the open and close, like, are there specific characteristics? I know you kind of went over this, but characteristics between the two that you notice when you're going through the data?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it is, and Kenny Cox and I talk about this quite frequently, the difference between a stated measure and a revealed measure. So in most mindset literature, there's actually now like a 6-item mindset evaluation, a 16-item, a 32-item, and like an 80-item. I mean, we're talking 3 decades of people doing mindset research. So people have created instruments a bunch of different ways. And they say, Derek, if confronted with this challenge, are you more likely to do A or B? It's almost like an eye doctor's appointment. With confronted with this feedback, are you likely to do A or B? What do you think about your intelligence? And so that's a whole bunch of self-reported beliefs about their individual mindset. What we're doing, and I think what we would have a lot more success doing in our educational interventions, is watching the way people behave, right? If you watch the way someone interacts with feedback, do they immediately take a post-test over without spending any time working through the feedback or going back through the questions they got wrong? They're guessing their way through it. They're not using that as a constructive opportunity to learn more. Does a learner passively consume 30 minutes of content, or do they pause and engage in content more effectively? Are they demonstrating that they're truly self-directed in the learning? So if you think about everything mindset reveals, it's curiosity, it's resilience, it's grit, it's intent to change, it's autonomy. Well, we can actually look at the behaviors that learners take while they're consuming content. And there are behaviors that clearly represent that learner's curiosity or that learner's intent or that learner's grit or that learner's resilience. So that behavioral data that gets generated while somebody learns is an unbelievably rich field for revealed mindset measures. That's what we've been working on for years.
Great. Thank you. That is it that I have for questions for you.
I believe the bar opens on the East Coast at 4:39.
4:39. Let me bring up my final slide. Just a reminder to everyone to take our survey. If you haven't already, it's right on the live page. Now, the moment everyone's been waiting for. It's Scott. Woo!
Hey.
Love that.
I just want to know what all the members of the Magical Measurement Club get. I'm guessing, based upon your graphics, maybe a deck of cards.
1 blue fleece.
Everybody. My only disappointment is that you didn't figure out how to add "I am the Walrus" into one of your. Work on that.
Give me a couple hours.
Great, Scott. Any closing remarks from you?
This is 9 years. We're getting closer to the to double digits.
I know. We
somehow.
can do something big for 20th.
Yeah.
Well,
yep.
I know. We can make someone else do it for us. That'll be the 20th anniversary.
Like our interns can be working hard on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, no, everything. I thought sessions went great. No real glitches. Smooth. Thanks everyone. Great faculty.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. We will see everybody in the spring. If you don't,
The fall.
if you don't hear from or the fall, that's right. We are the spring.
I feel like I've been in this position before. On behalf of the entire community, thanks again to you guys for doing this. I mean, there are very few things over the last 9 years that have contributed as much to the professional community as you two meatheads.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for
that highest compliment that we could possibly receive.
Yes.
All right. Well, on that note, the two meatheads are going to sign off. Thank you, everyone, for participating, all the faculty, all the people who tuned in. Archive is available now as soon as I click the end button for all the sessions. So on that note, I think we're done. We'll see everyone in the fall. Enjoy your summer.